The Pat Kenny Show. This is News Talk.
Well, the weekend is here once again. Restaurants are still closed. Are you running out of new cooking ideas? Executive Chef with the Market Hotel, Gareth Mullins, is on the line. And this week he's talking about steaks and a particular steak. Isn't that so, Gareth? Good morning.
Good morning, Pat. How are you?
I'm very well. It is a weekend for outdoor cooking, I would suggest. And you're suggesting steak.
Shining.
So, tell me about the particular steak that you want to talk about. What are its qualities?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk today about cooking a ribeye steak on the bone, or a côte de boeuf, as we'd call them in the restaurants, or a tomahawk steak. And I get my beef in the hotel from a company called John Stone, who are one of the many companies out there in my industry that have had to reinvent themselves, and they're doing home delivery services now. JohnStoneBeefShop.com, and they're dropping restaurant quality beef out to your house. And I just want to talk about how we're going to cook that successfully and the steps that need to be taken when you're attempting to cook a piece of meat.
Okay, now suppose it's delivered and it's delivered frozen or whatever. You have to defrost it, so there's a technique there. But before we do that, what is different about the kind of steak that restaurants would typically order and what we might get in our local supermarket?
I suppose the unique selling point for what John Stone are doing is that all of the beef is hand chosen down in the abattoir, and it's not just chosen by an expert butcher. They use machinery that, and I think we done a segment on this before with Henry on the show, but where we went down there. But the meat is X-rayed, and they're looking for marbling quality, and that's a word that's thrown around a little bit. And just to try and clarify what that means, is just that the fat content actually goes through the meat. That doesn't mean that the meat is going to be fatty. What that just means is when the steak is cooked, it's going to release some more flavour and juice into the meat. And it's a sign that an animal has been well reared and well fed. And I suppose what these guys are doing, from my point of view, from a chef's point of view, is that they're taking some of the guessing game out of whether the meat is going to be marbled. And I've used these guys, I suppose, I'm probably doing business with them now for 10 or 15 years maybe. Whenever I came home from Australia, I've been buying beef off them. So they also dry age their meat on the bone. What that means is when the animal is slaughtered, it's then hung on the bone. It's broken into 4 quarters generally and hung on the bone. And what they're trying to do there is just let the meat relax, and making sure that it doesn't, that it ages correctly. The way they do that is in a big massive fridge with big fans, and it's kept below 5 degrees. I think it's about 3 degrees to keep the fridge. So there's plenty of air circulating to allow the meat to breathe. And over that time it takes on flavour. It'll get more tender in that process, and allow for a fantastic, great tasting beef steak, I suppose, at the end is what the goal is.
So if you get one delivered and it, as I say, it comes frozen, I mean, you can just let it sit in the bottom of your fridge, make sure it doesn't drip on anything, because liquid will be generated with the defrosting for 24 hours. Do not use a microwave to defrost.
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons for that, because like a microwave, the way it works is that it'll start penetrating heat into the meat, which is going to start the cooking process, which could lead the steak to become, one, it could be a little bit tough because we've cooked it this way, but also, if you do that, you have to cook the steak straight away because you're introducing heat there, and then, once you start introducing heat, it has to be eaten within 2 hours and so on. So the best way to do it is, as you said, in the bottom of your fridge, leave it in the vac pack bag that it comes in. So if I'm having steaks tomorrow night, I'll take them out of the freezer today, put them in the bottom of the fridge, and then I light my barbecue, get it all ready to go, or if it's going to be cooking on the panel, I take it out of the fridge and let it come up to room temperature for about 20 minutes to half an hour if it's a steak. As I said, I'm talking about cooking a kilo ribeye steak here, so there's a little bit of cooking in that. It's going to take about half an hour, 40 minutes to cook all in. If it wasn't on the bone, if it was just a thick cut ribeye steak, you'd probably be looking about 20 minutes to cook if it's medium rare.
Okay, so let's take your steak to the barbecue.
Yeah.
How hot must the barbecue be before you throw the steak on?
So, The best thing to do is before you put your steak on the barbecue is leave the lid closed for a couple of minutes to generate as much heat as possible in there, and then you're going to lift the lid, take a wire brush, give the grate a good scraping down. That'll get rid of anything that was stuck onto the grate potentially, and then we move on to the steak. So rather than trying to oil the barbecue, we're going to oil the steak. So if you just onto the plate where the steak is, a little bit of oil onto the steak, turn it over, give it a good seasoning with salt. I tend not to pepper my steaks before I grill them. There is a potential sometimes for pepper to go a little bit bitter, and you lose the flavour of the meat a little bit. So I generally pepper my steaks when they come off the grill. That's a preference thing, but so you have your steak oiled up. It's at room temperature, and then you lay it onto the grill over the flame. With a ribeye, there is quite a lot of fat there, so there will be a few flames that'll spit up. Don't worry about that, just they'll burn themselves off once the fat disappears. And you want to cook the steak for about 2 minutes after you put it down onto the grill. This will allow the steak to take on the bar mark, which is kind of goes on in a lot of restaurants. You see the steak come out and have the X on it. And then if you just turn your steak at a 90-degree angle, that will give you the X part after the 2 minutes, and cook it for another minute then on that side. Turn your steak over and repeat that process. So it's going to get about a 2.5 minute sear on each side. If that was a ribeye steak off the bone, that steak for me would probably be getting pretty close to being cooked if the barbecue is hot enough. I may move it to a colder part of the grill and cook it for another minute or two if I felt it wasn't quite there. And then I would take it off the barbecue and allow it to rest in a warm place, maybe under the grill that's turned on very low, or your oven that's turned on very low, and leave it to rest for about 10 minutes. What this does is just let the steak relax after this big, high, intense heat it's after having, and the steak will become more tender. In that process, there will be some juices leak down onto the plate. I generally sit a little rack on top of the plate, and those juices can then be added into a peppered sauce, for example, or if you're making a sauce, so you don't lose any of that delicious flavour from the meat.
So the key things are very hot to begin with, anyway, to get that searing of the steak on both sides, and then cook it to your preference, but then let it rest before you tuck it.
100%. And what you'll notice with a quality of beef like this is that the steak will naturally take on a wonderful caramelization and loads of flavour. I think something that I would tend to hear and see with home cooks is they tend to keep moving the steak and pressing it and prodding it and sticking the skewer in and all of that. None of that is necessary. Put the steak on, leave it. Obviously, if you feel the steak is burning, then turn the steak over or move it to a colder part of the char grill. If you're doing this in the house and you're not outside on the barbecue, the same rules apply. A heavy based skillet pan or a grill pan or a non-stick pan, let it get nice and hot. That means you have to have it on a high heat for maybe 2 or 3 minutes before you add the steak. Because what I would ask people to remember is the piece of meat is quite cold. When it lands onto the grill or it lands into the pan, it's going to drop the temperature of that grill or pan, and that's where steaks can start sticking, or they'll start going that kind of browny colour. The juices will start bleeding out. So it's about heat, cooking, searing quickly, and then probably more importantly, letting the meat rest. I also think that's probably can be a common enough mistake. People that eat the steak straight away and they'll wonder why it's tough. It's because the meat hasn't rested and the juices ran back into it.
Well, you've done some videos on how to cook steaks along with a mushroom and a whiskey pepper sauce, rosemary potatoes and so on. That's to be found on your Instagram, your Facebook and Twitter at Gar Mullins. Yeah. And you also have given us a recipe for a steak sandwich, which we will share as well, because it sounds absolutely great with Dijon mustard mayonnaise and plum tomatoes and peppered creme fraiche and all that. Sounds really good. But Gareth, anyway, people can order from John Stone at johnsstonebeefshop.com if they want to try these really great steaks.
Yeah, and that's a home delivery service that the guys at John Stone have set up to try and counteract this massive drop in business. I mean, a lot of the beef that they produce down there goes for export as well. And the reason why they're freezing the product is that they had all this beef in production. So they've cut these wonderful steaks, they've vac packed them down and froze them. Is that has the quality suffered in any way? I don't think it has. I mean, if it's treated correctly, it'll arrive to you blast frozen in a refrigerated van. You stick it in your freezer when you need it. There's a couple of different offers they have on there. I think there's one where you can get it with wine. There's another one you can get it with beers. They've tied up with a wine company to do that. So you know what, I think it's fantastic, all the different producers and food delivery services out there that are having to reinvent themselves, and hopefully people like me will be back in our restaurants and our hotels soon, and we can get you guys back in.
They will all continue their services as well, because we're all finding them very, very convenient. Gareth, thank you very much for joining us. That's Executive Chef at the Marker Hotel, Gareth Mullins.